The sun had barely crested the ridgeline when the auction bell clanged. The metallic clang wasn't just loud. It was sharp, slicing through the cool morning air, sending a ripple of anticipation through the crowd already gathered in Dust Waters. Main Square dot boots scraped across hard-packed dirt. Men leaned against the hitching posts, spitting tobacco juice. Women stood in tight clusters, whispering behind gloved hands, eyes flicking toward the auction stage with the morning's goods. Or lined up Dot, and then they saw her Dot Clara May Hargrove, 16, big-boned, broad-shouldered, dressed in a faded calico dress that strained at the seams. The heat of 100 stares burned into her skin. Her father, Silas Hargrove, had one meaty hand clamped on her arm as he dragged her forward. His breath reeked of whiskey, even this early. "Move," he hissed through yellowed teeth. She stumbled up the wooden steps, the boards groaning beneath her weight. A boy in the crowd snickered. "Folks?" The auctioneer boomed, voice as slick as snake oil. "Now here's a rare sort o' deal for you. 16 years young, strong as an ox, and—" he hesitated, a cruel grin creeping in. "Built to last." The crowd laughed. Clara's ears rang. She stared at the horizon, refusing to look at their faces. She imagined being anywhere else. The creek behind the house, the little willow grove where she used to read. Before Silas had burned her books, Silas stepped forward. "She's been nothing but trouble since she could walk. Eats more than 3 men. Lazy as a Sunday preacher. Time she earned her keep." Gasps. A woman in a green bonnet murmured, "Selling his own daughter?" Her companion muttered back, "Better than feeding her." The words cut sharper than any blade. The auctioneer didn't miss a beat. Opening bid, $2 silver. Silence. A scrawny ranch hand near the front raised a hand. 1 silver. The crowd chuckled. Silas single quotes S. Face flushed red. "She's worth more than that." Someone shouted, "Not with that gut. She ain't." Laughter roared. Clara's vision blurred. Her palms were slick with sweat. She could smell the dust, the manure, the faint metallic tang of the auctioneer's brass bell. And then a shadow moved at the edge of the crowd. He stepped forward without a word. Tall, broad, clothes patched and worn from years in the wilderness. A thick beard framed a face tanned dark by sun and wind. His eyes, gray as winter steel, swept over Clara, then locked onto Silas. The murmurs began immediately. "Jonas Creed," someone whispered. "Thought he was dead." Jonas stopped at the base of the platform, reached into his coat, and set 2 gold coins on the edge of the auctioneer's stand. The square went silent. Gold was rare in Dustwater. Rare enough that even the drunkest gambler sobered at the sight. The auctioneer's jaw slackened. "Well now, sold, I reckon." Silas's brows shot up. 2 gold coins? For her? He laughed harshly. "Hope you got a big larder up. There in them hills." Jonas didn't reply. He stepped up onto the platform, took Clara's wrist in a hand calloused from a lifetime of hard work. His grip was firm, steady, not cruel. Clara's heart pounded. She wanted to pull away, but something in his eyes, unreadable, unflinching, made her freeze. Without another word, Jonas led her down the steps. The crowd parted, their whispers following like the tail of a rattlesnake. Mountain man'll work her to death. Better than her pa, maybe. Jonas Creed's got his reasons. And they ain't kind. They reached the edge of town, passing the saloon where piano music twinkled faintly in the morning air. Clara glanced over her shoulder. Silas was already pocketing the coins, his face a greedy grin. They left the buildings behind. Dirt road gave way to packed trail. The air grew cooler as the pine forest closed and Clara broke the silence first. "Why'd you—" Jonas cut her off. "Don't waste breath on questions yet. His pace was relentless. Birds scattered from the undergrowth as they passed. She struggled to keep up, her boots pinching, her breath coming in ragged gasps by. Midday, her legs trembled. "I can't." Jonas stopped so suddenly she nearly ran into him. He turned, eyes narrowing. "You can." Clara's cheeks burned, from the climb, from his tone, from the knowledge that giving up would prove every insult her father had ever spat. She bit her lip and kept walking. They crossed a ridge, the valley below spilling out in shades of green and gold. Clouds gathered on the far peaks. Heavy and dark. Jonas finally spoke again, voice low. "You ain't here to serve me food, girl. You're here to learn how to live." The words hit harder than the climb. She stared at him, unsure if she'd heard right. He adjusted the rifle on his back, glanced at the approaching storm. "Hope you can handle rain." Thunder rolled in the distance. They pressed on, the path, narrowing between jagged rocks. Somewhere in the trees, a wolf howled. Clara's stomach nodded, but not from hunger. When the first cold drop hit her cheek, she didn't know if it was rain or the start of tears. The storm swallowed the sun. The storm came fast. By the time they reached the cabin, rain was coming down in silver sheets, wind lashing through the pines hard enough to make them groan. Clara stumbled into the clearing, chest heaving, hair plastered to her face. Wasn't much to look at. Logs dark with age, a roof patched with fresh shingles, a stone chimney coughing pale smoke. A stack of split firewood leaned against the wall, covered with an oiled tarp. Jonas shoved open the door, motioning her inside. The air smelled of wood smoke and leather. Light from the hearth painted the walls in flickering gold. A rough-hewn table stood under the window, a single chair pulled up to it. Hunting trophies, elk antlers, a bear skull hung above the door. Clara stood dripping on the threshold, shivering, her boots leaving muddy tracks. Jonas shut the door behind her. With a thud. "Leave the boots by the fire," he said. She hesitated. Back home, orders were barked, not spoken in that even, measured tone. She pulled off her boots, setting them by the hearth, then looked around for somewhere to sit. Jonas dropped his rifle onto a wall rack, shrugged out of his wet coat, and hung it on a peg. "You eat?" She shook her head. He pulled a pot from a shelf, scooped in beans from a sack, added water from a bucket, and set it over the fire. The scent of simmering beans filled the room, earthy and warm. Only then did he turn to face her. Fully. "You ain't here to cook, clean, or keep me company," he said flatly. "You're here to learn." She blinked. "Learn what?" "How to survive out here. How to feed yourself. How to fight if you have to. How to walk into a town and not drop your eyes when someone looks at you." She stared at him. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. He ladled beans into a tin bowl and handed it to her. "Eat, then I'll tell you the rules." The beans were hot enough to burn her tongue, but she didn't care. She ate quickly, the warmth spreading from her belly outward. Jonas sat in the lone chair, watching her without speaking. When she was done, he set his elbows on the table. "Rule 1. No self-pity. It's a poison. Drink enough of it, and you'll be dead before the snow comes." She bit her lip, saying nothing. "Rule 2. No excuses. The mountain don't care if you're tired, cold, or scared. Either you do the thing, or you don't. That's the only measure." Her chest tightened. She could hear her father's voice in those words, but where Silas's tone was cruel, Jonas's was simply certain. Rule 3. You learn a skill every day. Fire building, fishing, chopping wood, setting traps. You'll fail at most of them at first. That's fine. You keep going until you don't. She frowned. "And if I refuse?" Jonas stood, towering over her, Then you go back to your father. You think 2 gold coins bought you freedom? It bought you a choice. Don't waste it." The words landed heavy, like stones in her stomach. She looked at the fire instead of his face. The next morning, training began. The sky was pale blue, the air crisp, the ground still damp from the night storm. Jonas tossed her an axe that felt like it weighed half as much as she did. "Split that pile by sundown," he said, pointing to a mound of logs as tall as her shoulder. She gripped the handle, lifted, and brought it down, missing the center. The axe glanced off the wood, the shock jarring her arms. Jonas didn't laugh. He just said, "Again." She tried. Again. And again. Blisters rose on her palms, raw and stinging. Sweat dripped down her back. By midday, she was panting, her arms like lead. She wanted to throw the axe down and scream. But every time she thought of quitting, she saw Silas's smirk, heard the jeers of the townsfolk. By sundown, the pile was smaller, but not gone. Jonas inspected it, then nodded once. "Tomorrow, you'll do better." The days blurred into a rhythm of exhaustion, fishing in icy streams until her fingers went numb, hauling buckets of water from the creek, stumbling through the forest under. The weight of a deer-hide Jonas had made her carry Dot at night. She'd curl under a blanket in the loft, muscles aching, listening to the wind howl through the pines. She thought of home less and less. When she did, it was only to remind herself she wasn't there anymore. One evening, after 3 days of failed attempts, she finally coaxed a spark into flame using nothing but flint, steel, and tinder. She'd gathered herself. The fire caught, flared, and held Dot. She grinned without meaning to. Jonas crouched beside her, studying the flames. "Good. Now do it in the rain sometime, and we'll talk." For a moment, sitting there in the glow, Clara felt something she hadn't in years. Pride. It was just after dawn when Jonas found the tracks. They were deep in the dirt near the cabin's edge, broad paw prints with claws like curved knives. "Bear?" she asked. Jonas crouched, touching the soil. "Cougar," he said, "but not fresh." She exhaled, relieved. He straightened, scanning the tree line. Not all predators walk on 4 legs. She frowned. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, a sound cut through the morning quiet. A single gunshot. It echoed through the forest, bouncing off the ridges. Birds exploded from the trees. Jonas's eyes went cold. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. Inside, now. Clara obeyed without argument, her heart thudding. She didn't know who had fired, or from where, but she knew one thing. The mountain wasn't empty. And whatever was out there, it was coming closer. The echo of the gunshot faded into the stillness. Jonas stood by the window, motionless, his eyes tracking the dark line of the pines. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, but Clara barely heard it over the pounding in her ears. "Stay here," Jonas said. He was out the door before she could speak. Clara stood in the middle of the cabin, fists clenched, staring at the door as the cold air rushed in through the open frame. She hated the waiting. It pressed on her chest like a weight. Footsteps in the snow outside. Jonas returned, rifle in hand, jaw tight. "They're here," he said. "Who?" "Men I thought I'd never see again." He slung a leather satchel over his shoulder, already moving to the shelves. "Pack your blanket. Food for 3 days. We leave in 10 minutes. The way he said it, calm, measured, made her skin prickle. This wasn't panic. This was survival. They slipped into the forest, the snow-damp earth muffling their steps. Jonas moved like a shadow, his long strides purposeful, his head tilting to catch every sound. Clara followed, her breath clouding in the cold air. After an hour, Jonas finally spoke. "They're bounty hunters," he said. "Names are Luke and Cutter, brothers. We crossed paths years back. What do they want?" He didn't look at her. "Me, and anyone with me if it gives them leverage." She swallowed hard. "You mean my—" Jonas stopped, turning to face her. "You're my responsibility out here. But you need to understand, if they catch us, you'll wish it was a bear instead." They pressed deeper into the mountains, moving along narrow game trails. The pines grew thicker, blotting out the sky. Clara's legs ached, but she didn't complain. She'd learned enough by now. Out here, every sound mattered. Every pause carried a reason. That night, they didn't light a fire. They ate cold. Venison strips crouched under a rock overhang. Snow dusted the ground, turning the night pale, and Sharp Dot Jonas handed her a small pouch. "Cover your boots with this." She opened it. Crushed pine needles mixed with damp earth. "It masks your scent," he said. "Cougars and men both track by smell." She did as told, the resin sticking to her fingers dot in the distance. Faint but clear came voices. Male. Laughter. The sound of someone chopping wood. Jonas's eyes met hers. No words were needed. They moved on. On the third day, trouble found them. They were crossing a frozen creek when Jonas suddenly stiffened. His hand shot up, signaling her to stop. Clara froze mid-step, the ice creaking beneath her boots. Across the bank, two figures emerged from the trees. The first was tall and lean, wearing a long duster coat the color of dried blood. His hair was slicked back, his grin wide and cold. The second was broader, with a scar dragging from his temple down into his beard. His rifle rested lazily on one shoulder. "Jonas Creed," the tall one drawled. "Didn't think we'd find you hiding up here like a scared fox." Jonas said nothing. The broad one's gaze slid to Clara. "Well now, what's this? Didn't know you were keeping company." Jonas shifted his stance, just slightly, enough for Clara to notice. "We don't want trouble," Jonas said. Evenly. "You walk away, we do the same." The tall one laughed. "That ain't how this works. You've got a price on your head, Creed. And she—" his grin widened. "She's just extra coin." Clara's chest tightened dot in the silence that followed. Jonas's hand brushed hers, just a fraction, and she realized he was slipping something into her palm. A small, cold weight. A knife. "Go," he said softly. Without looking at her dot, she hesitated. Now. Clara ran. Branches whipped at her face, the snow crunching underfoot. She didn't stop until the sound of shouting reached her. Jonas's voice, sharp and commanding, and the crack of a rifle. She ducked behind a fallen log, her breath ragged. She could see flashes of movement through the trees. Jonas diving behind cover, the broad-shouldered man firing from the creek bank. Her grip tightened on the knife. She could run farther. Disappear. Leave Jonas to whatever fate was coming. But the thought twisted in her gut dot. She crouched lower, eyes scanning the ground until she spotted what she needed. A thick branch, half buried in snow. She gripped it in one hand, the knife in the other, and moved back toward the sound of the fight. The tall man had moved to flank Jonas. Clara crept up behind him, the snow muffling her steps. Her pulse pounded in her ears. When she was close enough, she swung the branch with all her weight dot. It cracked across the man's back. He staggered forward with a grunt, dropping his revolver. Jonas didn't waste the opening. He tackled the man into the snow, wrenching the weapon from his grasp. The broad-shouldered one cursed, raising his rifle, but Clara was already moving. She threw the knife. It wasn't graceful, but luck was with her. The blade buried in the man's arm. He howled, the rifle clattering to the ground. Jonas was on him in 2 strides, slamming him into a tree hard enough to shake loose snow from the branches. And then, silence. They didn't kill the brothers. Jonas tied their hands. gagged them, and left them in the snow with just enough chance to survive if they worked for a Dot as they walked away. Clara glanced at him. You could have killed them. Jonas's eyes stayed on the trail. Men like that, death's too easy. Let them live with the shame of losing to a 16-year-old girl. Despite herself, Clara smiled. That night, they camped again without a fire, the stars hard and bright above. Jonas's arm was scraped, blood seeping through his sleeve. Clara cleaned the wound carefully, hands steady despite the sting in her own knuckles. When she finished, he leaned back against a tree. You didn't run, she shrugged. Didn't seem right. His gaze lingered on her for a moment. You're stronger than you think, Clara May. The words sat warm in her chest, more satisfying than any fire. But she knew the mountain wasn't done testing her yet, because somewhere out there, beyond the pines, storms were still gathering. And this time, they might not be human. By the time they reached the cabin again, winter had deepened. The pines stood heavy with snow, their branches bending under the weight. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, and every sound, the crunch of their boots, the creak of leather, carried far in the stillness. Jonas pushed the door open, scanning the interior with the same cautious glance he gave every room. Only after a moment did he step aside and let Clara in. Inside, the fire's embers had died. The place smelled faintly of pine pitch and cold ashes. We'll need wood, Jonas said. Clara didn't wait for him to fetch it. She shrugged off her coat, grabbed the axe, and stepped back into the snow. Her hands found the familiar grip without thought. She split each log clean and straight, stacking them neatly by the wall. When she brought them inside, Jonas raised an eyebrow. Neater than I'd have done it, she smiled faintly. Somebody taught me well. That night, Jonas sat at the table, map spread out in front of him. His finger traced the ridges and valleys. The brothers won't stay quiet forever. There's a trail that leads east, out toward the pass. Safer to move. Before spring thaw, Clara felt a strange tug in her chest, the idea of leaving the cabin, the mountains. But she nodded. When do we go? Jonas was about to answer when a faint sound reached them, a crunch of snow outside. Slow, deliberate. They both froze. Jonas blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by the faint glow of the fire. He moved to the window. Peering into the night, two shapes emerged from the tree line. Luke and Cutter. Alive, armed, and not alone. A third figure followed, a wiry man with a fur cap and a rifle slung low. Jonas's voice was low and even. They brought help. He handed Clara the rifle. You know what to do. Her hands tightened on the stock. A few months ago, the weight of it would have made her arms ache. Now it felt natural. The brothers didn't bother with stealth. They stepped into the clearing like men certain of their prize. Jonas Creed. Luke's voice carried over the snow. Time to finish what we started. Jonas stepped into the open, his own rifle resting on his shoulder. You boys sure you want to try this again? Last time didn't go your way. Cutter grinned. This time we take the girl first. Clara moved before fear could settle in. From the cabin's shadow, she lined up the shot the way Jonas had taught her. Breath out, finger steady, eyes locked on the target. The wiry man in the fur cap dropped, his rifle with a cry as her bullet tore into his shoulder. The clearing exploded into chaos. Jonas fired, the crack echoing off the ridges. Luke dove for cover behind the woodpile, returning fire. Snow sprayed into the air, stinging Clara's cheeks. Cutter charged toward the cabin, a pistol in hand. Clara stepped out to meet him, the rifle too slow for the distance. She swung the butt hard, catching him across the jaw. He staggered, stunned. Jonas's voice cut through the noise. Clara, finish it. She didn't hesitate. with a twist. She knocked the pistol from Cutter's grip and kicked it into the snow. Luke, seeing his brother down, broke from cover, but Jonas was faster. One shot sent Luke's hat spinning into the snow, and the man froze, staring down the barrel aimed at his chest. When it was over, the three men were on their knees, hands bound with rope. Jonas stood over them, breathing hard but steady. Clara approached, her breath still quick from the fight. Cutter's eyes darted to her, but there was no sneer this time, only something that looked a lot like caution. Jonas glanced at her. "Your call, girl." She thought of the auction block, of the jeers, of her father's hand shoving her forward, like she was nothing more than livestock. She stepped closer until her shadow fell over the men. "Walk out of these mountains," she said quietly. "Don't come back. If you do, I won't miss next time." For a long moment, none of them moved. Then Luke gave a single, stiff nod. By midday, the clearing was empty again. Jonas stacked his rifle on the rack, rolling his shoulders. "You handled yourself," he said. Clara felt the weight of the rifle in her hands, not the burden it once was, but the proof of what she'd become. A week later, they made the trip to town for supplies. Clara rode beside Jonas, her head high, her coat pulled snug against the wind. Dustwater hadn't changed. Same warped boardwalk, same sun-bleached storefronts. But as they passed, people turned to look. The stairs were different now. At the general store, Silas Hargrove stood by the barrels of nails, hat low over his brow. When he saw her, his jaw went slack. "Clara," he started. She walked right past him. Didn't even slow. Back at the cabin, the sun was sinking behind the peaks, painting the snow in gold and rose. Clara stood in the doorway, looking out at the valley. Jonas joined her, hands in his coat pockets. "You did what most folks never manage," he said. "What's that?" "Left behind the weight that was killing you." She smiled faintly. "Still, carry some of it." He shook his head. "Not the kind that matters." The wind whispered through the pines. Somewhere far below, the creek murmured under its skin of ice. Clara felt the cold on her face, the solid ground under her boots, the strength in her arms. The girl who had stood on that auction block was gone. In her place was someone who could split wood in a snowstorm, track a deer across frozen ground, and stand her ground against armed men. She took a deep breath, the air crisp and clean, and for the first time in her life, she didn't drop her eyes when she looked at the horizon. Sometimes the world will weigh you down, make you believe you're nothing more than what they call you. But out here in the wild, you learn the truth. The weight you carry don't have to break you. Sometimes it makes you strong enough to lift yourself. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. And remember, the mountains don't care what you were when you came, only what you are when you leave.